So I've just got a reading to begin with today. This poem's called Wild Geese. You know, it's that time of year, isn't it? The transition from autumn to winter. I haven't seen too many, you know, we get those V formations of the geese flying to migrate and all that cacophony of noise that they make as they're doing that. It's quite striking, isn't it? So this is a poem that was inspired by a poet who saw the geese migrating. Wild geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. Mary Oliver, lovely poet, yeah, and I guess, you know, she heard the wild geese flying over her place, and she was responding to that calling that she heard in them. She heard them calling to her, reminding her that she has a place in this world. Almost that there's a sense of something bigger than her, bigger than us, that's calling us, that's here, that we are part of, so that it makes us feel less small, less lonely, less isolated, in some ways less important. And the one thing that we're going to be using today is we're going to be trying a little bit of chanting, just a little bit, chanting Om. And I've done a handout for you on the importance of Om. And this yoga, what I must say to begin with is yoga is not a religion. It's not a religion in any way. You know, Hinduism and yoga sometimes goes together. The Hindus practice yoga, but yoga itself is not a religion, it's a philosophy. But chanting and a sound like the Om symbol pervades many different religions, like Amen, Om. It's the same thing. It pervades Judaism, it pervades Christianity, Buddhism, powerful, yoga, Hinduism. Many of the world's religions have some kind of symbol that sounds like Om. And it's very important. And when we chant Om, which we will be doing later, whether we want to do it silently or out loud, it's a way of helping us to connect to this bigger than us, to connect to a mind, a presence, the universal mind, if you like, Jung's collective unconscious. Because believe you me, the more you do yoga, the more you'll get a sense of you are part of something bigger than you, okay? So we're not isolated little rocks. We're we're connected to a web of life, if you like. So you've got the handout on the Om symbol. It's very important as a sound, because when we chant it out loud in particular, it has a certain vibratory effect that is very healing, that relaxes the brain, relaxes the mind, and vibrates throughout the rest of the body, relaxing the rest of the body. So, what am I going to talk to you about today? I thought I'd talk to you about suffering. Suffering. And there's a quote here from John Keats. Do you not see how necessary a world of pains and troubles is to school an intelligence and make it a soul? Yeah, we all suffer. Yeah, the world can throw crap at us, can't it? You know, life can sometimes be suffering. So nobody can escape suffering, but it's the view that we take of suffering that's important. And the romantic poets and the creative writers of that time, and still these days, they take the veneration of sadness and suffering to a kind of logical extreme, and they describe suffering as a prerequisite for creative life. And actually, writers and creative types are 8 times more likely to suffer from a major depressive illness. So there's we get a sense of, in some of our suffering, that there is a gift in it. And the man that took this to its ultimate miraculous extreme, if you like, is a guy called Viktor Frankl. He was a survivor of concentration camps in the war. And he went through the worst suffering that any human being, you couldn't even imagine the suffering that he went through. He wrote a book out of it called Man's Search for Meaning. And he went through the most horrendous suffering that other human beings caused to other human beings. And he survived it. There were many, many times when he nearly died. He saw all of his family die. He saw many, many of his friends die in extreme suffering. And he wrote a book out of it called Man's Search for Meaning. And there are several quotes that he talks about in terms of, in between something that happens to you, the suffering, and your reaction to it, there is a space. And that space is your choice to decide how you view your suffering, how we view our suffering. And our symptoms of anxiety and depression, there could be, sometime now or in the near future, a way that you, like me, begin to see them as a signal that something is waking up inside of us, that something there is telling us that it needs tending to, that we need to listen to these symptoms. And as we listen and tend to these symptoms and heal these symptoms through the practices that we're doing here, as we listen to them and tend to them and heal them, through this will yield the most miraculous transformation and growth, the most amazing transformation and growth in us. So I'm just asking you if there's some way now or in the near future that you can begin to see your symptoms as something positive, that something positive will come out of it. Because that's how the psychotherapy, the self-relations therapy that I work in views these symptoms as something positive that is going to lead to transformation and change. And quite often these symptoms are simply a sign that we have disconnected from our centre, that we have disconnected from ourselves, and perhaps that we are neglecting a deep part of ourselves that needs attention. So, depression isn't a biological illness. Anxiety isn't a biological illness. Lowered serotonin levels are a consequence of depression, for example. The doctors and the medics often talk about serotonin. And actually you've got to be careful with this, because even the scientists can't measure serotonin. They can't measure serotonin levels in our body, but they always talk about depression is low serotonin. It's a biological thing, it's a chemistry thing. It might be, but the lowered chemistry of these things in our body are a consequence of depression. Increased cortisol, the increased stress hormones, are a consequence of anxiety. But as we've already talked in the previous weeks, anxiety, that's it, if you could move across. Great, thanks. Anxiety and depression are often caused, but always exacerbated by our thinking. Thinking errors, black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking, awfulizing, magnifying, these thinking skills and thinking errors that you've already learnt. So anxiety and depression are not a biological illness. They cause changes in our biology, but they are actually caused or exacerbated by our thinking, which causes changes in our breathing, which causes changing in our posture. Remember the T model, components of existence. And we can make changes at each of those levels. So, have any of you ever wondered why sometimes we can go to bed and wake up more tired than when we went to bed? Have you ever had that feeling? Yeah. You go to bed and you just wake up even more tired than when you went to bed. Yeah, we all have that at some points. And quite often that can be more or less a constant thing. And that's because your mind, so this thing up here, the conscious cognitive mind, on some level is constantly active, is constantly worrying, constantly thinking, constantly working out a problem. Because the symptoms of anxiety and depression are kind of telling us that there's a problem there that needs to be solved. It's kind of calling us our attention to that. Depression, for example, is often a sign that, depression and or anxiety, a sign that our needs on some fundamental, our needs as a human being are not being met. And so our brain is constantly searching for a solution to that, finding the solution, so that when we go to sleep, we hit the pillow and our brain is still in what we call beta brain waves, so that the brain waves of problem solving, if you like, an active brain wave. And we go to sleep like that. So we go to sleep with our brain active. So what happens then is that our REM period of sleep, I'm not a sleep expert, but our REM period of sleep, rapid eye movement, starts earlier, lasts longer. And our brain is active more or less all the time during sleep on some level. And it drains us, it drains our emotional energy. Thoughts and thinking take up a lot of energy. I've forgotten actually, I was going to bring in 2 Kit Kats and a packet of crisps. Just imagine 2 Kit Kats and a packet of crisps. That's what your brain eats every day, just your brain, just your brain. Your brain is 5% of the weight of your body, but it takes up 20% plus of the energy. Okay, does this makes sense, doesn't it? It takes up so much energy, and that's why we feel so knackered when we wake up. So we're searching for this solution. And until we've found the solution to the problem, which you inevitably will, and go through this remarkable process of change and growth, we need ways of calming this down, of relaxing it, of controlling the energy. So the Yoga Nidra, and you've got a handout on Yoga Nidra this week. It tells you a little bit about what the practice is. We did a Yoga Nidra last week, and you've had that on your disc to practice as homework last week. It's simple Yoga Nidra. Okay, so I think it's an 8 to 15-minute Yoga Nidra. Right? Yoga Nidra can go up to 45 minutes. But Yoga Nidra is a systematic way of taking the brain into a very deeply relaxed state. And if you practice Yoga Nidra before you go to sleep, your brain goes to sleep deeply relaxed, and you have a much more renewing quality of sleep. So this is one way that we can control it. We're going to do a little meditation at the end of the session today. And again, meditation is another way of starting to work with this, become aware of how busy it can be all of the time, and starting to work to kind of calm it down. Control it is the wrong word, because it's just a matter of noticing and allowing, and slowly over time it gets less and less. The busyness, the thoughts, we can let go. And what is the most important thing that we can work on? Because the deepest human need, and I was on Radio Stoke a couple of weeks ago, I think it was just before I came to this session actually, a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about it. One of the deepest human needs is the need for connection. The need for connection to other people, the need to feel love and be loved, to give love and be loved. So the need for connection. But that need for connection always begins with feeling connected to ourselves. So connection with ourselves. Again, I'm coming back to that theme over and over again, aren't I, in this course. So the most important thing we can work on is self-acceptance. Accepting ourselves as we are, warts and all. You are imperfectly perfect. Each one of you are uniquely imperfect. And that's what makes you perfect. Instead of thinking, oh, if only I was more this, or if only I was more that, or if only I was slimmer, or if only I'd be perfect. Get it. And if you saw a perfect person today, they'd probably be the most boring person you ever met. So, you know, imperfection is what makes you you, is what makes you beautiful. You know, it might take you a while to realise this, but that's what we're looking at. And over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be working on this idea of self-acceptance. I call it the SWAN principle. And it begins with the S in SWAN, which stands for strengths. So we're looking at what are our strengths, and that's in the workbook today. today's workbook. So you've got a handout which lists, on 2 pages actually, a number of strengths, so that the handout is important for you to look at. And we have these strengths, human characteristics, personal characteristics and strengths. So we're not looking at strengths that are like a skill, like, oh, I can ride a bike really well, or I can do this posture really well, or I can sing really well. Those are more talents. Strengths are fundamental human characteristics. Things like wisdom and knowledge, perspective, curiosity, humanity, so kindness, the ability to love and be loved, justice, fairness, self-control, prudence, hope, spirituality, humour. These are strengths, fundamental human strengths. We'll all have most of them in some dose, but there'll be 5 or 6 that stand out more to you. So what I want you to do is, for your homework, you can start to think about it now throughout the practice, but for homework, if you can have a read of that handout, the strengths, the qualities, the human strengths handout, and as you read through it, just note or tick the ones that stand out more to you as being more meaningful to you, that you can relate to more, that perhaps are more stronger in you. And then you can transfer them, the strengths, into the numbers here. You may have up to 6 or 7 or more, but I've just listed 4 so that, you know, we start with small goals, don't we? List which strengths in you feel most appropriate. And on the top of the handout as well, I forgot to get myself a copy actually, there should be a web link to a website where you can do an online test, which is quite simple to do, which tells you your strengths. If you do the test honestly, it gives you a list of your top 5 or 6 strengths. So that's a link that you can type into, you know, the web browser and have a go at. It's free. You just have to log in and register, you know, with your name and stuff. So you can always do that. Or otherwise, just look through the handout and have a think about which ones seem to be most striking to you. And write them down in the workbook. Okay, so that's key to do this week. List your personal strengths. And later on in the practice, we're going to be doing a practice called the 4 directions, which is about transforming a problem. So just one more thing to say before we begin the practice on that. So later on in the practice, when we do this 4 directions, you're going to need a limiting belief to work on. Remember, we talked about limiting beliefs. I gave you a handout on limiting beliefs. So you're going to need a truth, a belief, or a statement about yourself that causes you to be, you know, less than accepting of yourself, that causes you to feel less than good about yourself. So it might be a truth like, I am depressed, or a limiting belief like, I'm a difficult person to live with, or I am too busy all the time, or I'm not a very good mother. That was mine today. Right? And you work on something that you have a limiting belief about yourself. So I just want you to think what that truth or statement might be that you work on today. And we do this wonderful practice, and it's quite interesting how it begins to change, because beliefs can be changed. Okay, and we have all of these resources now, don't we? Over the 5 weeks, this is the 5th week, over the last 4 or 5 weeks, we've been building up practices, personal resources that we can practice that help us with the symptoms of anxiety or depression, or just coping with life and becoming, solving our problem and becoming more of who we can be. So you've got loads of them now, haven't you? You've got the breathing, you've got the yoga nidra, you've got meditation after today, you've got the general yoga practice, you've got the thinking errors, the thinking skills, you've got the sankalpa from the yoga nidra. And we're going to be coming back to that next week, I think it is. So these are all your personal resources that you can practice that connect you to you, that bring you back into connection. Bless you. Okay. So let's begin the practice. So if you just clear your mat of any clutter and take yourself down onto your backs on the mat. For those of you who arrived late, just wanted to reiterate that we've got a video camera at the back of the class today. It's only filming me. If anybody objects to it, I just want you to get my attention in the next few minutes. It's only filming me, and it's because there's been a couple of people who've had to drop out due to work commitments or other things, and they were enjoying it and benefiting from it so much that they didn't want to miss out. So I've agreed to video it and then give them a private link to a private online space. So if anybody isn't happy with that, just grab my attention in the next couple of minutes and we'll stop filming and we won't use it. But that's all it's used for. Nobody else other than me is on the camera.